Welcome to the Birmingham Medical News Podcast, where we talk with top flight doctors about medical conditions they deal with, along with the solutions, which can range from traditional treatments to new cutting-edge therapies. I'm Steve Spencer. I'm the founder of Birmingham Medical News. We've been at it for 20 years. We are a medical newspaper that's mailed monthly to doctors, nurses, healthcare executives, and more throughout Alabama. Fortunately, you don't have to be a doctor or a nurse or even live in Alabama now to get the Birmingham Medical News, because in addition to our print issue, we now do the newspaper online. You can go to our website, birminghammedicalnews.com. Don't forget the www. On the right column, you'll see a place where you can subscribe for free. Once a month, we simply email you the exact same newspaper in digital format. In addition to the newspaper and podcasts, we do a blog, we put doctors on TV. So we're a busy bunch, and our partner today is also a busy bunch. Our partner is Kassouf & Company. They are an accounting firm that's almost 100 years old, based in Birmingham. They're a full-service firm doing taxes and accounting for individuals, businesses large and small. And for our purposes, they have a great healthcare advisory group that's actually celebrating 25 years this year. We're always appreciative of Kassouf. Now, today's podcast, we're going to be talking to a doctor about how he grew his practice, as well as how he had to develop his clinic and real estate space as the practice grew. And since we're talking about real estate, we've got a perfect sponsor for that. It's TRO Jung Brannan. Well, TRO Jung Brannan is a 115-year-old architecture firm. They specialize in healthcare architecture. And by that, I mean they have an incredibly extensive range of projects they've done. They've done cancer centers, patient bed towers, surgery centers, emergency department, women and children's care, cardiac care, medical office buildings. Inside these facilities, they've done a lot of ancillary work. They've done chapels, food service, parking decks. One of the things that I found interesting, they recently worked with the NICU to design circadian lighting so that the babies could have their natural rhythm of sleep. They received plenty of local and state awards. Recently, TRO Jung Brannan received the National Center of Health for Health Design Award for environments for a cancer center they designed in Oklahoma, Alabama. So today, talking about medical real estate and practice growth, we have two guests. Our first guest is Rich Campbell. Rich is the CEO of Veritas Medical Advisors. Rich graduated from Auburn University. Howdy. I'm an Ole Miss guy, but both my kids went to Auburn, so Tumor's Corner and all that.
There you go.
Anyhow, after graduation, Rich went up to our nation's capital, worked with one of the big nationwide realty firms. But, as we all know, who can resist the lure of Birmingham? So, Rich came back in 2009. He founded Veritas. And the best way to describe to you what Veritas does, if you go to court, you're going to want a lawyer. That's what Veritas does for medical professionals for real estate. Essentially, they're an advocate and an advisor. So when healthcare professionals are evaluating commercial real estate, whether it's buying, selling, leasing, or development, Veritas advises them. Now, with Rich, we have Dr. Corey Hartman. He's a dermatologist in Birmingham. He grew up in New Orleans. He's got his internship at Tulane in internal medicine, followed by a residency in dermatology at the University of Alabama. Birmingham or just
UAB. Actually, it's technically Hearsing School of Medicine now.
Yeah. Gotcha.
At UAB.
Right. And so, if I understand it right, Dr. Hartman, after graduation, went to work with a big practice, but in 2011, you started your own practice, Skin Wellness Dermatology, from scratch, which is pretty cool. That year, I understand the Birmingham Business Alliance honored you with Startup of the Year. And we all know how in every town, local magazines will have these best of, deals that readers vote on. And in two different magazines on 2 different years, Dr. Hartman was actually voted best of in the dermatology category.
Yeah.
Anyhow, enough of my blathering. You guys take it away.
Yeah, Steve, thanks so much for having us. I think that where we wanted to go today was Dr. Hartman has had this fantastic career, and growing a practice internally has its own challenges, risks, and rewards. And along the way, you're also managing the physical plant of where you see your patients. So as you grow, are you leasing space? Do you own space? How do you plan for growth? Again, what are the risk profiles of each of those decisions? And I thought a great way to start would be to ask Dr. Hartman to take us through when he began to start his own practice, the thought process that he went through, and each step, and then where he is now. Is that fair?
That's a good question. Yeah. So I came to Birmingham for residency at UAB. I had never been to Birmingham. I'd only passed through because I went to med school in Nashville, and my hometown is New Orleans. So it was a place to stop and get gas. And then I added the program late, came down for the interview, really liked it, came for residency, had a great time in the program, but really I was a 3 and out. I told Pat Mercado, I'm going to be here 3 years. And she told me, that's what I said 19 years ago. So here I am, 21 years later, but I'm from New Orleans. I grew up down the street from the only black dermatologist in the state of Louisiana. And that was a fact until like 2 years ago. So despite the fact that there are 2 large programs in the city, just going to put that out there. And so I had a call to go back home, but I finished the year that Katrina happened. And so it wasn't quite the right time. My wife's an orthodontist. At that time, for them to go back, they had to do a lot more testing, and it was a lot more of a pain. So I thought, well, maybe I'll go back to Atlanta. Atlanta was where I went to college, but my idea of Atlanta 20 years ago and what Atlanta is today are totally different things. So I said, well, I'll just stay on the faculty for a year, figure it out, quickly realized faculty academic life was not for me. And I left to go learn the business at a multi-specialty group. And I was there for 2 years. I always knew I wanted to start my own practice. I don't know. Some things you just know to be true. And I knew that that's how I planned things to be. So after 2 years there, it was actually 2009. It was the same year my son was born. Actually, like the same month, we opened the practice. And it was a 2,000 square foot building. It was brand new on Central Avenue with Joe LaRussa, who was an allergist, who was leaving his practice at St. Vincent's, I believe. And he had bought this land in the middle of this empty street that nothing was going on. It was an old pest control place, so they had to do all this crazy stuff to get it cleared. And I look at Central Avenue today, and he was the first one there. I'm going to give him credit for like lighting that spark. But it was a good time, 4 years. We were just bursting at the seams. I had 4 employees at the time. It was just me. I brought in a nurse practitioner who was there part-time because there wasn't even enough space for us to be there. Together, I talked to Rich. Well, Rich had already helped me with that space.
Yep.
Like, Rich has been there from the very beginning. Like, we're bonded forever.
Just breaking in for a second, how did you find Rich?
Rich is the brother of Lauren Huey, who was a year ahead of me at UAB in dermatology residency.
Okay.
So that's how we first met each other.
And Louisiana natives.
And Louisiana.
Oh, yeah,
so,
that's right.
Duh.
Right.
Yeah.
Some kindred spirits.
Well, I'm from New Orleans. Let's just clear that up. Yeah. So we did that project, and it was great, and I leased, and it was what was comfortable for me at the time. Thalia Baker was the Kasuf practice person who helped me out. I always want to shout her out because she was so great, and we're still friends today. And after about 4 years, we realized that we needed more space, and we needed to be able to do something different. And a building nothing's ever for sale. I feel like you just kind of scope things out, you decide what you want, and then you sort of approach people. But I can't remember how that deal even came about.
Barry McLean
was
practicing in it and getting out of this practice.
That's right. We had a retiring physician.
Yeah. And a real quick tie-in to, Corey, you made the decision to lease coming out on your own.
Yes.
Not committing to a purchase at first. and starting in a way that you could get your feet under you and figure out who you were.
This is exactly right. So that's why I said that's what I was comfortable with at the time, because I feel like there were always opportunities to maybe do more, but I always wanted to be comfortable with what I was doing. So starting a business alone, that was one business. I wanted to make sure I was good there. I guess that's kind of my thing, because I left UAB to really learn the business, and then I started the business without any real estate. And then I started the real estate with the next building, which we were owner occupied. And then we went to a larger space and we had tenants, which I don't think I would have been ready for when we did the 2013 deal.
So this is your third space.
This is well, it's my second space that I've owned, but it's the third space that the practice has inhabited.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, that process to watch Corey grow. One of his first decisions to be on Central Avenue in Homewood, as he said, when he chose it, Central was nothing like it is today, and it continues to come around with further development between, the latest with Hero Donuts and Luca, the restaurant, all of these great things that are happening. So Joe LaRussa broke in and custom built Corey 2,000 square feet, which we both knew it was going to grow out of. It was a limited period of time. But when you find a relevant piece of property, the minute he said, hey, it's time for me to grow, I am busting at the seams, somebody was going to step in right behind him, because it's 2,000 square feet of clinical space in the heart of Homewood. So there's going to be no issue backfilling that space.
So that was sublet then? Is that point? At that point?
Initially, it was sublet because he grew fast enough that he said, look, I can't even wait to the termination of my lease.
Gotcha.
Normally, that's a problem. We would not suggest banking on that. But it's this series of decisions that I feel like, Corey, you've made over the years that all of them are risky. All of them have some element of a risk.
Right.
Starting your own practice. And you're mitigating wherever you can to absorb that risk to a comfortable level. And the mitigation there was, it's 2,000 square feet of clinical space, incredibly efficiently built, very nice, in the middle of Homewood.
Gotcha.
And attached to an allergist.
Right.
Which is, dermatology and allergy have a coexistence and a symbiosis that dermatology and cardiology don't have.
Right.
You realized you needed to move. You got your sublease. Tell us about finding the second property, because I didn't realize that we're now on the third.
Yeah, the second property we knew, and Corey went a little bit above doubling. So he went up to about 5,000 feet from 2,000 feet. And again, stumbled on to something that he had in his head. You first have to have a program in your head of, why am I growing? What are the pain points and how do I solve for those? At the same time, when you're in one of the most sought after submarkets, I would argue, in the entire state, like Homewood, you have to be able to bend a little bit, get creative, and look at a priority list and say, well, if I've got 8 things on my priority list and being in Homewood is one of them, I might have to drop another 3 or 4 off
Just stay in Homewood.
just to stay in Homewood.
Right.
And so,
Right.
but I think that decision in itself has paid dividends, the consistency.
For sure. Well, Homewood was always the draw. That's where I live. That's, where my kids go to school. That's where we spend our time. So I wanted to be a part of my own community. That was important to me. And so, it's sort of, I don't want to say it limited, but it sort of focused our efforts in search.
So why did you want to buy?
Well, I wanted to buy because ownership is always the best. I mean, who doesn't want to own? Owning property is where it's at. And if I'm going to continue to pay rent to someone, create legacy, and just all the other reasons, but also you feel more confident. The level that I wanted my practice to be at, I didn't want to squander any money. I wanted to make sure that was something that I was going to be able to benefit from. And that's, what the experience that I wanted to deliver to patients.
And you bought a building that would only accommodate you. You were a single tenant in that building, so you were in total control, which is a big benefit.
Absolutely, total control. That's going to be a theme.
And so what were, in that first project where it really did come down to you, your name was on the line, you had already bought the building, you were going through the redevelopment, do you recall kind of the biggest wins, the biggest, wow, that was great, that really worked out, and then the biggest challenges that you faced in that first project?
Well, I think I think that we knocked the design out of the park. I feel like we made a decision toward the end where architects that we were talking to weren't really delivering on what we were trying to do. And I think even at that time, like you mentioned, we sort of knew that this was a limited sort of space and, may not be the final destination. So we're really going to like build it up. Let's make it as nice as we can possibly make it. So that was one thing. We also had an established brand at that time, so it was easier to accommodate some of the changes. And we knew that we wanted to grow. I mentioned I already had a mid-level who didn't have enough room. I had students who were approaching me about potentially working at the practice. So we wanted to have more space to grow into. And then at that space, the success made other problems because then the parking was an issue and we can't buy this device because we just don't have the space. And that's when I was in denial, I think. I feel like I was in denial about that, and Rich was like, it's probably time.
Because it takes a lot out of it.
It takes a lot.
Right?
It's a lot.
And moving takes a lot.
Moving takes a lot. It's more the construction than anything else. There's always something, and I've done this now between this office and the other office 6 times. Yeah. So we're doing a renovation currently. Right. And the endodontist... Why
are you doing a renovation?
Because we need more space. Yeah, so we hired another doctor who starts in August. We have a PA who went from part-time, another Louisiana girl, part-time to full-time. And so we needed more space. We're doing a lot more clinical trials now. So we wanted a clinical trials area. So we're doing that. So this is my 6th project. And every one is a little different because this is the only one that I've done where I'm in the building.
Right.
And it starts like on Monday.
It's happening around you.
It's right now.
I'm a little confused. So
okay.
You've been in 3 locations.
All right. So let me give you the timeline. Okay. So we started on Central Avenue, 2009.
Right.
In 2011, we had because my nurse practitioner, who I had hired, she only worked a day and a half, needed space. Okay. She lived down 280 Greystone area. Okay. She heard about, and she had left a practice in that area. Okay. She needed more space. There was an opportunity in OBGYN group where a bunch of doctors had left. They had a building that they weren't using except like 1 day a week. Okay. So we went in. And we leased space from them for 2 weeks. I mean, down for 2 days. Right, down 280 in Chelsea, actually. Okay. So we saw a lot of opportunity for growth. We were there 2 days a week. We quickly realized that we were probably covering the majority of the lease, and we weren't in control. They were trying to tell us what days and all that. The space next door was available. So we got that space. That was about 2,200 square feet, I think. So we took that and then had that full time. Okay. So that was project number 2. Okay. Huntington was project number 3. That was behind Alabama Outdoors, the 5,000 square feet.
Okay.
The first time that he bought.
The first time that I purchased, right. Okay. And then 2013, we moved into that. And then 2020, we moved into our current space. And in 2022, I guess, the Chelsea space had gotten too small. There was an opportunity. The pediatrician next door, and both of us wanted to grow. I let them have it, and we moved in closer because we had an opportunity at this crossroads development at the corner of 119 and 280. So we doubled our space there. That was, I guess, 2 years ago. So we became part owners in this complex. So again, another opportunity for ownership. Okay. And we occupy about 4,500 square feet there. That was 4. Okay. And then the current building now, that was that next purchase. And then the renovation. Expanding. Yes.
Okay.
Can you, I think, something that listeners may appreciate, when you are a growing physician, and you're hiring not only other MDs, but you're hiring mid-levels, and you're figuring out a way to sometimes bring medicine to the patient. So you might maximize a location, but notice that, hey, there's a part of town where we've either got a lot of patients coming from, or we have a fantastic person who already lives down there and we can really service an area. Okay. You're constantly having to balance, I can grow this practice and do it through satellites. I can grow this practice in one location, or I can do both. And there's no rule book on how to do that. So
Yeah.
internally, how do you?
Yeah, and there's a
Anything
lot of
about
risk associated with that too, especially being the only owner. And I'll just share a quick story. I don't know if you even know about this one, but we, about 2 or 3 years, we had a PA who worked for 2 years, just under 2, and that'll be important in a second. Just under 2 years, had a PA that worked for us who had ties to Tuscaloosa and wanted to branch out to Tuscaloosa. I have 2 young kids. I'm not trying to drive to Tuscaloosa. But my other doctor, other nurse practitioner, and this PA wanted to go. So they would all go 1 day a week. We had an opportunity because one of my medical school classmates, and her father's a physician, she's a physician, they had a building that he owned, and on Fridays, they didn't use it. So they offered to let us use it for free. So we went out there, I guess maybe a year and a half or so. And, that was a great offer. It was awesome. I appreciate it. But after a while, that kind of thing sometimes doesn't always last forever. And we had an opportunity to lease a space in Tuscaloosa. And the PA who brought the idea to me, like 2 weeks before I was about to sign the lease, comes and explains how she's, got another offer and blah, blah, blah. So that was my, one big reminder that I'm really the one that has all the liability when all this growth is going on. Because if I would have signed that lease, that would have put me in a position where I had to make some tough choices. Again, I was never going to Tuscaloosa, so it would have been hard for me to keep that commitment. So anyway, just about the risk.
Yeah. So satellite practices can be a great way to give a pressure release valve, we would say. So if you cap out and you know that you can take care of patients in some outside area, it's a great way to get a pressure release valve. But you're adding risk. You're signing on to the dotted line of another committed space. You're staffing that. Right. And if you're staffing it, then is the staff coming from your primary office or is it totally independent staff and you're running 2 at the same time? So many decisions that come right in line with your major real estate decision. So Corey's third real estate piece was buying the building that he's in now, where you will be, you are now 11,000 square feet of 16. And so he graduated in a sense to, he still has total control over the building, and it actually gave him control over growth because he has other tenants in the building where if he feels like he's got a need to grow, he can choose whether to renew leases or not and how to grow within the space that he's got. So he's got a building now that should, in theory, accommodate him for a very long time, but until the point that he needs it, he's got somebody else helping him pay for it.
Exactly.
And so is that how you see it?
That's exactly right. And that was less of a risk. I mean, it was a risk in a way, but it's also like sort of a comfort because, again, the headache of a move, you don't want to deal with. And I just know other physicians in my position who have similar practices here in a way. No matter how successful their practice is, if they don't own the building, they don't feel like they've really captured it all.
A question that I think comes up a lot each time, and I remember this, both times that you made the decision to acquire, we would talk a lot about feeling like that you were stretching financially. We looked at the values that we were offering and ultimately paying, the total project cost, where it was all coming in. Looking back, 2024, you are in a fantastic position. You've got a building value that's way lower than what it would cost to rebuild it. You've been able to build some equity in that. But at the time, if you recall,
of course,
it did not feel that way. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah.
Of making that commitment.
I mean, I think that goes right in line with all the other big decisions that you have to make when you own a medical practice. Even hiring a doctor, hiring a device, you always wonder if it's the right decision. But in real estate, I have never looked back and thought that I didn't make the right decision. It's always been the right decision. And I think it's always been at the right time.
Yeah.
So some of that risk, even if the reward is great, if it's going to give you a lot of heartburn and you can't sleep at night, it's not worth it. And I've never really been at that point. So you're supposed to have a little nervous anxiety about it, right? Because if not, then you're probably not thinking big enough.
Well, there's an old real estate adage, Steve, that there's one thing that fixes a bad real estate deal. It's time.
Oh.
Time.
That's true.
Okay.
Right? There's only so much real estate, and so time, and sometimes a lot of it, tends to
That's
fix bad real estate deals. But you have to have the staying power. You have to have the ability to really commit to something and see the long-term value. And so an advantage of Dr. Hartman going in and making these purchases is that he has the belief in skin wellness dermatology,
Right.
and Lux and your other brands. So if he can commit and believe in himself and his practice and his hiring structure and his own success, then that lends that consistency to the building. And even if you go in feeling like, oh, this is maybe pressing the top of the market, this is going to be expensive, I'm going to have to figure out ways to make it work. If it's a relevant location, a relevant and good consistent location, whether it's dermatology or allergy or orthopedics, whatever it is, if it's a relevant location and you believe in the practice, time will make that okay, which means he was making all of these decisions when you were in your 30s and 40s.
I'm still in my 40s.
Right? Right. We're calling that
barely,
out.
But yes.
We're calling that out. Yeah. So, and I think that's important as well. Do you think that you would have taken the same risks in your 50s?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably. I think that I am a little bit of a risk taker in general. Like if you compare me to my wife, I'm definitely the risk taker in the relationship. But financially, and what did my financial outlook look like at my 50s? That's the other question. I mean, I think that makes a big difference too.
Yeah. Something to pay attention to if just your not a personal life cycle, but what we call a practice life cycle. Okay. So if Dr. Hartman is 53 and says, based on how I've set this up and how I'm going to practice for another, 20 years. Or I have a succession plan with young MDs and or associates who I have a deliberate method of moving into the ownership of the practice so that skin wellness is bigger than me. Skin wellness is going to keep going. Well, that gives you a pretty long run to make real estate decisions.
Right. Add to that the fact that, dermatology is a specialty that we're all very fortunate to be in, but also you can niche yourself in a way that the work is really more like a hobby after a point. You're doing only what you really love to do. And so, I was talking to a mentor who's 65 now, and she said she wants to go until she's 75. And I thought, wow. But then I thought, but when you retire, you have to have a hobby anyway.
Yeah, you're having fun.
Right.
So if you're just having a good time and you're in a position where the stress level is low.
Your first building was one off, I would say a half block off of a main thoroughfare. Easy to get to, absolutely great accessibility, but not necessarily visible.
Not visible. In fact, I feel like Alabama Outdoors still owes me a check for how many times we would say behind Alabama Outdoors every single day.
Right.
No matter how hard we tried, that was always an issue. So moving to the main road was huge.
So it's now no longer an issue. If you'll tell people, tell the listeners where you are now and that how you designed the building deliberately to reflect your image and your branding, and did it matter?
Yeah. Oh, of course it mattered. So we are on Independence Drive in the Medical Mile, is that what we call it? The area between the two hospitals at the time, the two major hospitals, St. Vincent's and Brookwood. And we are just kind of nestled in there in line with Mayfair Pediatrics and Urology Centers of America. And I designed the building in a way that would keep it fresh, but also respect the surroundings. And it was just a great, when I first saw the building, I wasn't sure about it. But it's a classic sort of style. It just needed a little bit of a refresh. It's sort of modern. It has long, sleek windows kind of throughout the whole thing. It has sort of a great GRATE fencing, sort of. I don't know a better way to describe it, but we painted that our logo blue, which is a little bright, and we put blue on the building, and it made it stand out. And I remember a patient came in one day, and she told one of my front office girls, "I can't believe they let him put all that blue on that building." And she was like, This is his building.
Right.
He owns the building. Anyway, I thought that was funny, but it's you can't miss it.
Okay.
And I like to think that other people now say that they're next to that bright blue building.
Well, they're I don't know whether I would call it mid-century modern, but
It's mid-century modern.
Okay,
Yes.
and there is an external walking path that you enter from an elevated walking path from the outside. So it's got railings that go down it, and the railings are definitely mid-century modern railings.
Okay.
Black, a little funky. Nobody really knew what to do with them, and so Corey comes along and gets his color blue of his logo. He gets the big S for Skin Wellness, his logoed S up on the corner of the building, and then matches that blue with these railings.
Okay.
And then goes to the other side of the building that has a different, if you're northbound on 31, the side of the building that you see coming from the south,
Okay.
and does some blue accents over there as well. And so coming north or south, you can't miss it. It's got these blue accents, but they match, they point to his logo, you see it.
Okay.
And so it's a stake in the ground, but my curiosity would be, do you feel like that visibility means something to your business? Do you feel like that it brings people in?
Oh, I absolutely think it does. And it sets the tone for what's going to happen inside, because we have a lot of fun at work.
Yeah.
You know, we have a good crew. We're young. We always have good music. We're just a good time. And I think people come to expect, and you're not going to wait long. You know, we run an efficient ship. Like, we have a definite culture in the building. And I think that starts on the outside, because it just sort of stands out and it's different.
And in the latest building, to go from all of the fun, pretty stuff, what is the biggest, oh no, or didn't see that coming, didn't expect it, wasn't ready for it? What is the biggest issue that you've had internally, whether or not you've told me over the years?
That's a good question. So I'm not sure if I feel like I've ever made any big, huge mistakes. I feel like with every project, there's always something that gets forgotten. Mm-hmm. There's always something that goes awry. And so every time I do this, I use that knowledge and I really try to stay on top of it. And so when we did this building, and you just can't control everything, and I've learned to accept that too, but the office furnishings, like the cabinets and the exam rooms, that all comes from I'm not going to say the name because we're still cool, but it was funny at the time because everything was in place, and then he just forgot to put the order in. So, we had to pivot and go with something totally different, but it's just always something like that, I feel like, every single time.
And time is always a precious factor as well, right?
Never enough.
Even if it's your own building and you're controlling the contractor and you're in theory controlling the process, you're still held to this weird timeline.
Because I can't do everything myself.
Right.
Yeah. You still have to rely on people.
So, and you've got opening dates.
Yes.
So you've got a date that you want to open, and all of a sudden that sets a timeline.
It's always a crunch at the end. Always. So
how when you're dealing with the unexpected occurrences, how important do you think it is from with TRO sponsoring this, from an architecture's perspective, from a general contractor's perspective, how important do you think it is in picking that team?
Oh, okay, huge. So, see, Rich and I have a history, so he's lining these things up. He knows all these stories. Yeah, it is really important to get a contractor and an architect, I think, that have worked together before and that have similar visions, because if not, what can happen is you get stuck in the middle between these two entities that have to work together, but they have no history. Mm-hmm. They really have no commonalities, and it's just tough. Mm-hmm. And that happened on one time, and it just made everything more expensive, take longer, and a lot more of a headache. Okay. So yeah, in subsequent projects, I decided that I wanted to, instead of me picking both, I would choose one, and then have their input on the other.
So to clarify that, and I think it's a great point, the idea of having a really well-run, concise team, and if, let's say, Corey has built a relationship with an architect saying, okay, I'm going to choose you to do this design. Now you I want you to take the lead on choosing the general contractor.
Right.
I'll have final say, but I want you to take the lead on choosing them with who you've worked with, who has experience from a clinical standpoint, and the results tend to reflect that.
I agree.
And you are in now 3 ownership pieces of medical real estate. Did I get that right?
Is it 3?
Because of
Yes.
Stadium Trace.
Yes.
So his wife is in an ownership position in her practice. So I consider them a pair.
Yes.
Sure, of course.
And then Dr. Hartman Skin Wellness has got 2 locations, and
Greystone,
Greystone, and Homewood.
and
Yes.
then, okay.
and he has an ownership in both.
Did you, now there was, if I understand it right, there was your second practice, your second building in Homewood. Did you sell that one? I thought that was.
Yes,
Okay,
we sold
I see.
that
Okay.
to a real estate investment trust
Okay.
that I actually happened to be a part of too. So
Okay.
I kind of sold it to myself.
So keying in on that though, he took a space that was older clinical space. It was dated. It was a colonial styled building. He modernized it, put a different spin on it, and then when he went in and redesigned it, what he said earlier, Corey made a statement earlier of, we decided to kind of go all out and make it nice. What made that so perfect was that his design, regardless of the interior style, the layout could have worked for other practice types.
Okay.
So he knew
point.
that it was probably not going to be the last place that he was going to be. And so,
Yeah.
hey, when it comes time for me to sell this, I need to know that I'm not looking for another dermatologist, or I haven't specialized the design so much to my style or so much in a specific way that other people would look at it and say, I can't use it.
Right.
It was a classic,
Racetrack.
run of clinical space. And so
Gotcha.
when it came time to sell it,
It wasn't.
we didn't
hard.
put it on the market.
No.
It was an off-market deal. Word got out, and it was done like that.
But
Okay.
anything that you guys have that you feel is important?
We talked about the renovation.
Lending. You are when you decide to own.
Yes.
You personally, maybe through an entity, but you personally are on the hook. You are an owner, so you've started another business effectively in real estate,
Absolutely,
and
yes.
you are committing to that business as well as your medical practice, and that's now times 3.
Yep.
Between-
it's another not job full time, but it's another thing you have to manage. But I always say that I have helped 3 different dermatologists in the country just last year start their own practices. 2 of them were in private equity groups, which I'm a little bit opposed to. I'm all about physician independence and entrepreneurship. And I think the narrative right now for the residents that are in training is that it's impossible, you can't do it, you must join this PE group. And that's just not true.
Yeah, you've proven.
It's just not true.
Right.
So we've been able to help a lot of people do that because I think it's always, like I said, ownership is important. And at the end of it, you want to have something to sell, or at least be in a position to be able to control your destiny. And you can't do that if you never own anything, the practice, the building.
I mean, all 3 of us are entrepreneurs here.
And it's not cut out for everybody. I get that.
Sure, of course.
But I've also tried it the academic way. I tried it the group medical practice way, and I've never worked harder. The reward has never been better, and I would not change a thing.
You bring up private equity, and I do think that remembering that there are listeners out there who are probably have faced this or will face this, I think that private equity's introduction into medicine a decade ago, when they really started hitting it pretty hard, it's something that comes up a good bit, I think, across the country, and certainly in this area with UAB as this constant provider of really high-level physicians.
Right.
So the Birmingham medical market is on par with some of the bigger cities across the country. And so that means that private equity certainly pays pretty close attention to it. And when you go down the path, Dr. Hartman just mentioned younger physicians coming out of residency, they have this natural fear and almost this belief of, well, the only way that you're going to survive is to be a part of these larger groups. And so private equity comes in, and when they do, and if you are involved in your real estate, they have a very different idea
Absolutely.
of real estate than you have. And so that's something to be aware of if any of the listeners are exploring that. Your real estate setup absolutely becomes a factor. The amount of obligation that you have put yourself under, the length of term of the leases, whether or not you own, it is going to come up in those conversations and in those negotiations. And more often than not, it's going to be this consistent pull away of control from the doctor. You're giving up control, and it's not only in your practice, but it changes real estate decisions as well.
So
Absolutely.
would they rather own the real estate themselves, or would they rather you just simply lease?
They don't want the real estate, and they don't want long-term obligations on real estate. They want maximum flexibility.
Yeah.
So the physician who is thinking differently, they're thinking much longer term, has actually set themselves up for consistency.
Yeah, right.
And private equity comes in and doesn't see at least the real estate piece in that way. They say, I want the shortest obligations that I can get, and I want the most number of shortest obligations that I can get.
I guess they're worried about the risk, I guess?
Right.
They are.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that doesn't do a real estate owner any good. And so if you're the practice owner and you're in that world, it comes into play.
It does, but I think that it's always an advantage. I think that you always have the position of strength in the negotiation when you do own it, particularly if the building is working well. And if you have good visibility, and if you have practice recognition, and sort of like you said, I think that's when the stability is actually an asset.
And I suppose if you sold to a PI group, you could say, hey guys, if you don't want the real estate, I'll lease it to the practice.
Yeah, that's what it always ends up being. I mean, they don't really want it, and you can still have a business running with them involved.
Yeah.
So even if you're not involved anymore.
Right.
Now, if the building's not, because I've seen it also where the building is terrible and they want out, but if the building is working and is adequate, then I think it's an asset.
And just for clarity's sake, because this goes to, Steve, one of your most recent comments, in all of the scenarios that Dr. Hartman went through, skin wellness dermatology was a tenant with a third-party lease,
Absolutely.
a well-drafted, documented lease that leased from an LLC or an entity
I see.
that he controls.
Okay. I didn't.
But there's absolutely an independent lease. So the medical practice is always going to be a tenant,
Gotcha.
which also puts them in a position of good control and consistency that even if the practice sells or in succession planning, he begins to sell off pieces of his practice to younger physicians coming up, the building is totally separate. There's a fair market value lease that's in place, and it removes a lot of the emotion that could come along with that potential imbalance of, well, I'm a physician owner of Skin Wellness, but I don't own the building. What you know is that Skin Wellness has got a market lease that's fair and equitable. It wasn't designed with these inflated numbers to make a real estate deal work. He took the time to say, I really need to know what's fair, what's pushing the practice too hard, what's in the middle of the road, and let's set up the practice for success in that way. And oh, by the way, it also benefits me as an owner of the real estate.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, just like you just said, when the real, if it's a fair market value and the private equity group comes in, they know they're not going to get a better deal anywhere else. So why would you even they have a lot of incentives to just stay in place if everything is working.
Yeah.
Which that's a business that's a passive income generator.
Gotcha.
We love those.
Right.
Well, sounds good. I want to thank both of you. It's been really interesting. Honestly, I learned a lot.
Good.
And I've always said for years that I wish I'd invested in real estate when I was young. Never did, and I wish I would have. But anyways, great learning experience.
Thank you.
I want to thank both of you. And for all of you folks who are listening, I hope you got something out of it, and we'll see you next time.